Okay.
And I'm going to start screen sharing. Let me just get Dan's talk and move it over. Sorry, give me a second. I have two left hands here. And move to full screen. Marianne, can everybody see the full screen?
I can see it.
I can see it, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Dan, over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I've not talked at this symposium before, but I'm looking forward to that tonight. Thank you all for attending. My only regret is I got a very bad cold in Boston, which I'm recovering from. So my voice is a little raspy. Hopefully it'll hold up for the entire time. That's my only concern. But anyway, the topic is really the American Civil War and the fact that as the war broke out, actually even before the war broke out, mail service across the lines became an issue because obviously families and businesses had correspondents on the other side of the lines and they needed to reach them. So that's what we're going to talk about is the suspended mail service across the lines. Next slide. So just as a background, Abraham Lincoln was elected president in November of 1860, and the South immediately kind of rebelled. South Carolina seceded on December 20th, a month after Lincoln's election. The vote was 160 to 0. There was no doubt that South Carolina was leaving the Union. Several other states followed, and by February 4th, they had conformed the Confederacy. Texas joined a few days later, and then more states joined. So by July 2, you had 11 states which now formed the Confederate States of America. The CSA had its own post office department, had its own postmaster general. It started doing legislation as early as February 23rd, getting mail handling policies in place, setting new rates, et cetera, et cetera. But the Union decided to keep operating the mail in the seceded states. They thought that, well, first of all, no one actually thought a war would ever break out. They really thought that the South was being silly and that if they showed goodwill, the Southern states would rejoin the Union and forget all this nonsense, which actually obviously did not happen. So they continue to operate the postal services in the seceded states. Fort Sumter was bombarded April 12th. Then things started getting a little testy. There was obviously armed conflicts. And then federal forces came into Alexandria, Virginia on May 23, 1861. That closed the important route, the north-south route between Washington, D.C. and Richmond, Virginia, which I'll show in a minute. And then on May 31st, the U.S. finally gave up. They suspended all postal operations in the Confederacy, and the Confederacy then initiated their own postal operations June 1. So between May 23rd and then June 1, everything kind of happened. Next slide. So here's a map of the US. The red line is the demarcation between the Union and the Confederacy. All the black lines are railroad lines in the South. So if you look at that, you see this extensive network of railroads that delivered the mail across the southern states. Next slide. But if you go back to that map, look at the routes. So to have the mail go from north to south or south to north across the lines is between Washington and Richmond. It was only 100 miles apart. And then in the west was between Louisville, Kentucky, and Nashville or Memphis, Tennessee. Those were the two routes between north and south. If the mail did not come across those two routes going from north to south, the South could not get mail. And conversely, the South sent their mail up to the north through those routes. Those were the two principal routes. Next slide. So May 24th, that route was closed. The Washington, D.C. Richmond route was closed on May 24th. So here's a cover. This was placed in the mail on May 28th, placed with a carrier fee to pay the carriage to the mails, and then the 3-cent stamp to pay the postage. Well, May 28th was too late. The route was closed. So this cover could not get across to Virginia. Instead, it went right to the dead letter office in Washington, D.C. Now there, these letters would be opened up, and if they found the name and address of the sender, they'd return the letter to that person. So in this case, you can see the name and address of the individual on the left is inscribed, and then the dead letter office on June 4th sent it off back to that individual and charged them 3 cents for the postage. So this letter did not get to Virginia. Next slide. South had the same problem. The lines were closed. So this letter, which was mailed from Athens, Georgia on May 22, never got north to Baltimore because the postal route was shut down. So this letter instead went to the Confederate States of America dead letter office. And you can see that hand stamp on the left, dead letter office, Confederate States of America. Rare actual marking, very few are known, but that's where this letter ended up. Finally, you see August 23, that's when the dead letter office decided to send the letter back to the sender, August 23. Next slide. So now Montgomery Blair, who was the Postmaster General of the United States, said, issued an order on May 27 saying, okay, we're going to stop all the postal services in the seceded states effective May 31. So here's the message, which he says, and he says all the post services, Virginia, et cetera, and he names all the states, says we're not doing this. We're suspending the services, and we're going to letters for these offices, which are closed, are going to be forwarded to the dead letter office in Washington, D.C., which is exactly what happened. Next slide. So now, if a letter somehow managed to get through, it could be delivered. But then the U.S. government, from between May 24th to June 7th, set up another situation. They then decided to suspend all southbound mail on June 7th. So here's a letter mailed from Connecticut on June 15th, or posted June 15th from New Haven. You can see the New Haven CDS is kind of a very light red-orange in the middle of the cover. But this did not get very far. It did not get to Mississippi. It went right to the dead letter office in Washington, D.C., and then it was sent back to the sender, due 3 cents. Never arrived in Mississippi. Next slide. There's another one. Now, after the north-south route between D.C. and Richmond was shut down, you could still send letters via Louisville, Kentucky to Nashville or to Memphis, Tennessee. But on June 12th, a few days later, the U.S. shut that route down. They shut that down. So now you could not send letters south to north or north to south through that route either, the other major route. So this is a letter postmarked June 18th in Port Gibson, Mississippi, and is addressed to Louisville, Kentucky, but it does not get there. The markings are interesting because this was sent from the south. Now, at this point in time, the Confederate postage was 10 cents for a letter traveling more than 500 miles. So the person sending this letter from the south paid 10 cents in money for the Confederate postage. It's marked paid, and put a US 3-cent stamp on there, figuring that that will work. But that did not work. It would not be honored, and the cover simply went to the dead letter office, did not get through. Next slide. So then we have iconic hand stamp, Southern Letter Unpaid, which is one of the iconic hand stamps in Civil War postal history. So, now you have the Nashville-Louisville route shut down on June 12th. So what happens? Well, a lot of people sent their letters from the south to the northern destinations through that route, but they couldn't. It was shut down. But the Nashville post office, the Nashville, Tennessee postmaster said, well, I want to get rid of all these letters piling up on my desk. So that postmaster employed private express companies to send the mail to Louisville anyway. So the Louisville postmaster was getting all this mail dumped on his desk. Well, he didn't know what to do with it. He just held on to the mail. This went on for a few weeks, and then the post office department said to him, you have to forward letters from the South for the loyal states, and you have to mark them unpaid. Since these letters came from the South with U.S. stamps, the North did not want to honor these U.S. stamps because they were supplied from the South, which meant that the South was benefiting from Northern stamps. And, they didn't want the South to benefit from the 3-cent stamps. So anyway, the post office department told the postmaster, take all those letters, remove the postage stamps, and then forward the letters. Well, the postmaster decided this was ridiculous. He's not going to remove the postage stamps. So instead, he created a hand stamp that said Southern Letter Unpaid. And he used that. And then instead of removing the stamps, he used that hand stamp and then said, okay, the stamps are invalid for postage, and now I can put them in the mail. Next slide. And that's what he did. So here's an envelope. This was mailed from the South. It was mailed from Murfreesboro, North Carolina. And the guy in the South used a U.S. stamped envelope, figuring that'll work. It's 3 cents U.S. postage. And he paid his 10 cents Confederate postage in cash. So it's marked 10 cents, paid, has the 3 cent stamped envelope, but it's coming from the South. So in Louisville, the postmaster said, I can't accept this. The 3 cent envelope is not acceptable. So he put this hand stamped Southern letter unpaid, marked it due 3. Then he put it in the U.S. mail to Louisville to go to the addressee. But the addressee would get it and have to pay 3 cents postage. So that's the story of the Southern letter unpaid. There's actually, I think, 28 Southern letter unpaid covers that are known. Wolski did an extensive census and study of these. They're fascinating and they tend to be iconic pieces. They tend to get very expensive. Incidentally, the addressee in this case is actually Gatling, the guy who invented the Gatling gun, which was an automated kind of machine gun, which helped the North in their battles. So that's the Southern letter unpaid. Next slide. So now you have the North and you have the South. Now, the biggest express company in the United States at that time was Adams Express. Adam had formed his express company in the late 1830s, around 1839, 1840. He was very successful. He bought up other companies. He amalgamated all these companies. By 1854, he had this very large company and really was the 800-pound gorilla. He had all the express business in the middle Atlantic states. But now he realized that there were two governments. South Carolina has seceded. So what are you going to do with mail going north to south and south to north? So even as early as then, before the May 24th kind of everything got shut down, he started to increasing carrying of letters because people were worried about the letters actually getting to their destinations. So he could charge and get letters and carry them in addition to his express business. Then Abraham Lincoln wanted to kind of put a stranglehold in the South. So on April 19th, he already shut down all the southern ports and blockaded the ports. So now mail had to go by railroad. It couldn't go by ship. And now more and more people were worried that their letters would not get through. So Adams now realized that he could make quite a large profit carrying letters in addition to packages. And interestingly enough, the use of stamped envelopes became very important because the stamped envelope meant that the U.S. government already got its 3 cents. And whether it actually carried the envelope or not, it still got 3 cents. What's better than getting 3 cents for doing nothing? And that's what happened. Next slide. So here's a letter. It comes from the South and it goes to New York City. It was never hit the post. It never got into the post office mails. This letter was an Adams Express company office in Charleston. And in Charleston, it's registered on May 17th. And that letter is carried across the lines all the way to New York City by Adams Express, by railroad, outside of the mails. But the U.S. government got its 3 cents postage by using a stamped envelope. When it got to New York City, it was placed in the mail for carrier delivery, and there's little red New York City carrier marking right there. So now Adams Express was carrying mail, and the U.S. government was getting their 3 cents. He was getting extra money for carrying the letters, and everyone seemed kind of happy. Next slide. So this became a very lucrative business. So around June 15th, there were 3 companies now that would carry mail north to south and south to north across the lines without regard for the government operations. So now the Adams Express was the big company and had already been carrying letters across the line. American Letter Express was formed specifically to support this business. Whiteside also supported this business. So these 3 companies were now carrying letters north to south and south to north for a fee. And that fee was in addition to the US and Confederate postage. But if you wanted to get your letter carried to your addressee, either in the north or in the south, you had to use one of these services. So they all made money doing this. As it turns out, once again, Adams Express was the 800-pound gorilla. They carried most of the mail. American Letter Express, much fewer. Whiteside, very little. Whiteside, the other two companies had offices in Louisville, Kentucky, and Nashville, Tennessee. Whiteside had his office in Nashville, Tennessee, and in Franklin, Kentucky. So Whiteside covers are very actually only two known. But now these companies could carry mail and charge to do it. Next slide. So this is carried by American Letter Express. And this now introduces the concept of two envelopes to mail a letter. One envelope was not enough. What happened was that in the North, there was someone who wanted to mail this letter to Richmond, Virginia. Well, that sender took an envelope. He took this letter. This is the letter he wanted to send to Richmond, Virginia. He enclosed this in another envelope. In the outer envelope, he paid the U.S. postage to get it down to Adams Express office, and Adams Express carried it across the lines to their Nashville office. Once it got to the Nashville office, that outer envelope was thrown out. No one needed it. So that was thrown away. Now you had the inner envelope. And now Adams Express had I'm sorry, in this case, American Letter Express had the inner envelope. They put their hand stamp American Letter Express, Nashville. They indicated 10 cents postage paid. The postage was paid. Most likely the sender actually sent money in that outer envelope to pay for the postage. So now the American Letter Express company could hand stamp the envelope. It had paid 10 cents and it put it into the Confederate mail in Nashville, Tennessee. Goes in the mail on August 13th. So this was two envelopes, kind of roundabout, but this is the way the mail got delivered, north to south and south to north during this period of time. This letter, when it got to Richmond, was postmarked August 23rd. Actually, the person was not at home, and actually the letter got advertised for 2 cents. But the basic thing here was American Letter Express, as Adams Express, two envelopes, get the letter to one of the offices, one of the express offices, and then carry it across the lines and have it delivered and put in the mail on the other side. Next slide. So how did people know about this? Well, these companies advertise. So in a cover that went from north to south or south to north, here are two leaflets the American Letter Express Company used, and they put in the envelopes. I retrieved them from one of the covers I bought. So here's a notice. Here's important. To the people of the Confederate States, this is how you mail a letter to the North. For the people in the United States, this is how you mail a letter to the South. It tells you exactly what to do. So for the example, the notice on the left, it tells you, enclose and direct your letter to your correspondence as usual, but put that in another envelope. On the outside, address it to American Letter Express in Nashville. Close 15 cents in money. We'll take care of the rest. Same thing for the North. So people were told basically how to send their letters back and forth, north to south and south to north. Next slide. Adams Express did the same thing. So here's a letter. There's a cover that went from the south to the north. The outer envelope's been discarded. This is the inner envelope. The inner envelope is open, gets to Adams Express office in Louisville, which is in the north. It gets its Adams Express hand stamp. They put 2 3-cent stamps on for a double weight letter, and they put in the U.S. mail in Louisville the next day. So, and they put on a label to tell you, okay, you mailed your letter from south to north, but if you want to go back to mail it to the south, this is what you do. So once again, both of these companies advertised and told the public how to mail letters. This also appeared in newspapers, but this was a way of making sure the person understood how to mail letters. Once again, 2 envelopes, a little cumbersome, but it worked. Next slide. So now we look at Adams Express. Adams Express, most of the across the line mail during this period, June 15th to August 26th, is by Adams Express. About 78% of all the surviving covers were carried by Adams Express. This is typical. Now, in this case, there were no 2 envelopes, just one. The person had the letter placed in the mail in the Adams Express office in New York City, and you can see the large Adams Express Company New York City hand stamp. It's addressed to Athens, Tennessee. They used a U.S. stamped envelope, so the U.S. government gets its 3 cents, even though this thing never got to the U.S. mail. It went to Adams Express. They carried it across the lines. So the person you can also see in the lower left, it says per Adams Express Company. So the sender already put this directive on there, and Adams Express carried it across the lines all the way to Knoxville, Tennessee, which where they had offices in the South in several cities. So Knoxville, Tennessee, it arrives there, and then from there they carry it to Athens, Tennessee. So very neat and clean. Next slide. Now here's one from the Adams Express office in Boston. They had offices in Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, etc. Here's one from Boston. And if you look at this cover, you have the Adams Express CDS, Boston, July 6th. Then if you go over to the right, you see another little hand stamp that says paid JWR, 25. This is the hand stamp for the guy in the Adams Express office who handled this letter. And he indicates the express fee of 25 cents has been paid. So the guy paid 25 cents to get his, what would have been a 3-cent stamp to go south, north to south. Now, if you look at the far right, at the very top, you'll see a little tiny bit of the stamped envelope sticking out, the very top of the, so that's a Memphis, Tennessee provisional stamp, which I'll mention in a minute. But it's just covering a 3-cent stamped entire. So what happened is in the North, they mailed this letter from Boston. They used the 3-cent stamped envelope to pay the U.S. government its 3 cents. But Adams Express carried it. Yeah, we're close with the arrow. We're getting there. It's a little lower, but that's okay. And then U.S. government got its 3 cents. Adams, no, don't go. Go back, please.
All right.
Sorry. Can we go back one?
Hold on a second. I'm trying to.
No, you're going forward. Please go back.
I can't. I'm trying to go back.
Well, otherwise we see if you can go back.
Yeah, it's not doing it.
Okay, let's stop here then. So in that last one, so I'm sorry, Colin. So in that last one, you had the Memphis provisional stamp. So remember, June 1st, the post office in the South started operating. And on June 1st, now they're operating, but they have no stamps. They just have a post office. And so people had to use money to pay for their postage within the South. And then a bunch of postmasters started making their own provisional stamps. So they used labels, they created stamps, they did all kinds of things. So there were basically 3 things. They made their own stamps like Memphis did. So that was a Memphis provisional stamp. In that particular cover, it was carried by Adams Express from Boston down to Tennessee. When it got to Memphis, the Adams Express office in Tennessee put a Memphis provisional stamp on there to carry it through the Confederate mail. So that was a Confederate provisional stamp. Now here's one going from the South to the North. Same situation. This letter started in the Adams Express office in Nashville, so the South. And if you go to the far left, let's not use the arrows. We go to the far left, there's a provisional stamp. On the far left, there's this funny looking stamp. This is a Nashville provisional stamp paying the Confederate 5 cents postage. So this person from the South used a provisional stamp to pay the Confederate postage. It's 5 cents due. There's a pencil notation too, right in the middle. That indicates 2 bits. That's the 25 cents Adams Express were getting for carrying the letter. They got 25 cents. The Confederate government got 5 cents. It goes across the lines by Adams Express to Louisville, to their other office. And the Louisville office puts on a 3-cent American stamp to make sure the U.S. government gets paid. So U.S. gets 3 cents, Confederacy gets 5 cents, and Adams gets 25 cents to carry this letter. And that's how it got across. It's also addressed to Miss Annie Knowles, but there's no relationship to me. There's an Annie Knowles correspondence, but I don't know anything about the individual, and we're not related to the best of my knowledge, but it's kind of interesting. Next slide. Okay, This one is particularly interesting. This is actually a prisoner of war cover. So the Battle of Bull Run or Manassas, depending which side you're on, north or south, I think it was on July 21 was the Battle of Manassas. So now you have soldiers who were captured at the battle. Well, what do you do with these people? Well, there was nothing to do with these people. There were no exchanges. Nothing was set up. No one even expected this battle to actually occur. No one expected there to be prisoners. But this was there were three prisoners held in a tobacco warehouse in Richmond, Virginia, for want of a better place to put these individuals. One of them was a chaplain, at least one, maybe all three, I don't know, but at least one was a chaplain. So this gentleman wanted to get a letter back to the north, to Connecticut. So he had some resources, and the envelope was marked per Adams Express. It got postmarked in Richmond, Virginia, which is where he was in the tobacco warehouse in Richmond, and 10 cents was paid in money. That's why you have the circle paid 10. So you have the circle paid 10. So 10 cents was paid for the Confederate postage to get it across the lines. Once it got across the lines, Adams Express office in Louisville picked it up, put on a US 3-cent stamp, and put it in the mail to get it to the addressee. This is actually the earliest recorded, I should say, prisoner of war letter from the South to the North. Earliest one, August 7th, just after the Battle of Bull Run. But Adams Express carried the letter. Luckily, the man had 10 cents and he could pay the postage. Next slide. Now, letters also went overseas, although much less commonly. New Orleans was in the South, and it was in part of the Confederacy in August of 1861. This letter was sent to Germany. And if you look at the letter, where it's addressed, you'll see on the letter it says, per Adams Express Company by first steamer via Liverpool or Southampton. So this was carried across the lines by Adams Express from the south to the north, and in Louisville it was hand stamped Adams Express Louisville, hand stamp. They put a 30-cent stamp on to pay the postage overseas, and it got to Germany via New York City. So it went from the south, from New Orleans, carried by Adams Express to Louisville, from Louisville to New York, and there went posted overseas with a 30-cent stamp. Rare cover, by the way. Next slide. Now, Whiteside's Express, I'd said, there's only actually two known Whiteside's Express covers. This is one of the two. They used labels. So Whiteside, who set up this business to make money, I don't know how many covers were carried by him and his operation, but there's only two that have survived. So this letter went from south to north, and he used these little labels, private letter mail. This letter got to his office in Franklin, Kentucky, and when it got there, he put 3 U.S. stamps on there, 3 1-cent stamps to pay the U.S. postage, carried across the lines, and went into the mail in Franklin, Kentucky, to go to its destination in New York. But there's only two known. Rare cover. Next slide. So now you have these 3 companies carrying mail. Now, we started with May 24th with the shutdown of the north-south route. By May 31st, there was no longer any servicing of the postal services in the South by the federal government. And on June 1st, the South started its own postal service, even though they had no stamps. But now we're kind of through mid-June, and now you have these private express companies. So all this happened in a very short period of time. So there's not a lot of mail that went back and forth that's actually survived. But Adams Express was actually a very astute businessman, and he figured out that doing the mail back and forth across the lines he could do this. But what about the mail in the South? He couldn't control the mail in the South because his company was based in the North. So what did he do? He took his company and divided it into 2 pieces. He took all his southern routes, southern offices, everything, and he sold the whole southern thing, kit and caboodle, to one of his employees, Henry Plant. So he sold the southern part of his company, Adams Express, to the guy who manages southern offices. I guess, was a legitimate deal. Money exchanged hands. And now you had a Southern Express company that could do all the express business in the South. And they worked jointly with Adams Express. And it was actually the biggest express company in the South, operated throughout the Confederacy and operated actually even after the war ended. Next slide. So here's some examples. So here's a imprint envelope from Adams Southern Express. This is before the company was actually formed. And here he is mailing out notifications to people about his new company. So in this envelope, which is posted in Memphis, Tennessee with a Memphis 5-cent Confederate provisional, is the envelope and the announcement of the formation of Southern Express Company. This is the actual announcement. There were many, but this is one that survived. And it says, as you are doubtless aware, the Southern stockholders of Adams Express have purchased from their late associates all the property of said company, and with the right to use the name of Adams in their business, and they've organized themselves under Southern Express Company. So now you had the Southern Express Company, which is a spinoff of Adams Express. And here's the flyer telling everybody what's happened. And Henry B. Plant was the president, formerly manager of Adams Express in the South, but now president of his own company, which was based in Augusta, Georgia. Next slide. So here's an envelope, which was Adams Southern Express, but now Adams is crossed out, company is added, because now Southern Express was the new company. And there's the first Confederate stamp honoring Jefferson Davis and picturing him, mailed from Columbus, South Carolina in 1862 on a Southern Express Company imprint envelope from Columbus, South Carolina to another town in South Carolina. Next slide. Now this is a rare, it's the only recorded cover with the Southern Express hand stamps. The Southern Express Company was formed, it existed, and here on August 23, 1861, is a cover that's mailed from the South to the North. So as in the case of the other ones, there's on the upper right-hand corner, there's a Nashville 5-cent provisional stamp. The Confederacy did not have its own postage stamp until October 16th. That's the earliest recorded use of a Confederate postage stamp, October 16th. So in August, in Nashville, you had this provisional stamp which paid the 5 cents postage for Nashville. Then that letter got to the Southern Express office in Nashville, which used its hand stamp to cancel the stamp. And in pencil, this says paid 2 bits, paid 2 with a line in pencil, that's paid 2 bits, 25 cents. That then went across the lines to Adams Express. Since the two work together, they're basically the same company. So Adams Express carried it across the lines on August 23, got to Adams Express in Louisville the next day, August 24. They marked it, hand stamp, and they put a U.S. stamp on it and put it in the Louisville mail on August 25. So this went from Nashville to Louisville to the U.S. mail to eventually to Philadelphia. This letter ended up, it's a long story, but ended up in the dead letter office in Philadelphia because postmaster did not understand what was happening with this cover. And so it ended up in dead letter office, but then was released when people figured out that it was a legitimate cover and should be sent on to its recipient. But now the U.S. stamp on this cover, the earliest known use of that stamp in Louisville was August 23. So this is a very early use of that stamp in Louisville. It's also the only recorded cover with the hand stamp Southern Express Company. Next slide. So now that's kind of how things went on this. Now, Abraham Lincoln decided August 26 to stop all correspondence. So he stopped everything. All commercial intercourse, all correspondence, everything was shut down. So the private express companies that were doing business from June 15th onward were out of business. They could not send anything across the lines. It was done. It was over. Now you had the war going on, and you started with more military maneuvers. You had more fighting, and eventually the Northern armies kept going, invading further into the South. They captured Nashville, New Orleans, and Memphis on those dates. So by June of 1862, some of these major cities were now they had been reoccupied by Northern federal forces. Now that meant that Blair, who's the Postmaster General, said, we can start doing mail service between the loyal states and these cities. Well, you could, except you couldn't send them beyond those cities because those other postmasters and post offices were under Confederate control. So what happened is that a lot of mail got sent to those cities, and that's where it ended up dying. And at that point, it just went to the Washington, D.C. dead letter office. So a lot of mail ended up in the dead letter office in Washington, D.C. Now, there was a rule on the book that said when a letter could not be sent to its addressee, the post office where it ended up would have to put on the back of the cover why it was being, what was happening and why it was happening, and their post office should be indicated on the back and the back of the cover. So suddenly you have the back stamps of covers with these various cities, New Orleans, Nashville, etc. And then those letters would be sent to the Washington, D.C. dead letter office. And there they would put a mail suspended marking on the front. So the mail suspended marking would go on the front of the cover by Post Office Department rules and regulations. And the back of the cover is where it would be coming from. So if you start analyzing all these covers, you could figure out, and people have figured out, which post offices used which markings. Next slide. So the person who did this the best was Frank Crown. So Frank Crown has been a lifelong member of the Civil War Philatelic Society, formed one of the great collections of Georgia postal history, both pre and post Civil War and during the Civil War. And he developed a census of all of the known mail suspended markings. And that's all on the Civil War Philatelic Society website. And he figured out that these are the different markings were used and where they were used. Washington, D.C. dead letter office had the oval mail suspended. Nashville, which is B, is mail suspended in a straight line. They also had C and D. C and D may be the same marking. Hard to tell, but there's only one known of each. Cannot be forwarded was only used in New Orleans. Memphis used no mail service, and the other two are actually from England, which I'll get to in a few minutes. So on the Civil War Philatelic Society website, Francis Crown has every one of the markings shown. He has the provenance shown. He has the cover illustrated, and you can see everything you want to know about every one of these markings and covers. And the update was about April of 2026, so it's very up to date. I used that information to write an article in the Chronicle and to try to figure out how these markings were used. We'll get to that in a minute. Next slide. So here's a listing from Frank's work of what we know. The mail suspended marking in Washington, D.C. Now, these are being now used throughout the war. August 26th is done. No mail is going back and forth, and now there's no mail. It's all been suspended. So the Washington, D.C. dead letter office marking, there's 30 known. The Nashville markings, there's 8 known of one and 1 of each of the others. New Orleans is 11 known. Memphis is the rarest one. There's only 1 known that says no mail service. Then the ones from England we'll discuss in a few minutes. Next slide. So here's the classic. So here's a letter mail from Philadelphia, November 1861. Well, the routes were long closed. There was no mail going to the south. So the person addressed this letter with a 3-cent stamp, hoping to send it to Kentucky. Well, Kentucky was occupied by the Confederacy. There was no mail routes coming from the north. So this letter went straight to the dead letter office in D.C., where the mail suspended marking was placed on the front of the cover. Next slide. So what happened with these covers? Well, actually, according to the records, there were almost 47,000 letters written in the loyal states and addressed the Confederacy in this 1-year period. 47,000. Despite that, there's only 30 apparently that have survived with that marking. So what would happen is they get to the dead letter office, the letters would be slit open, and they would see who sent it. And if they had an address to return it and there was money and other valuables, they would take that letter and return it to the sender in this pre-printed envelope. Post Office Department, Dead Letter Office, in print, due 3 cents. So they would send that back to the sender in this envelope, and the guy would pay his 3 cents to get his letter back. So they say about 1/3 of these letters would actually be sent back this way. But I have to tell you, this is really very rare. I've only seen a few of these. So if 1/3 of the letters were sent back in these envelopes, very few have survived. But I guess that makes sense, because if you got your letter back, you would take your letter out of this envelope, and you would take the money or whatever was there and the correspondence, but you wouldn't need this thing. Who cares? So this would go in the garbage. So very few of these have survived. But this is how the money got sent back. Next slide. So here's one of the Nashville mail suspender markings, kind of a grungy looking item. I used to own this, I sold it. But in any case, it's mail suspended. So this letter was mailed to Lieutenant Dooley in charge of a supply train in Georgia. Well, there's no way the letter would get to him. It only went as far as Nashville. Nashville said the mail suspended and sent it back. They actually sent it to Washington, D.C.'s dead letter office. Next slide. Here's another one from Nashville. It's addressed to Atlanta, Georgia. Could not get to Atlanta. The North had not yet occupied Atlanta. It was still under Confederate control. It could not get to there. And so it went to the Washington, D.C. dead letter office. Next slide. This is a nice cover from Nashville. So this is actually post-Appomattox. Robert E. Lee surrendered on April 9th, 1865. And right after that, you would think that maybe the mail services in the South were kind of reopened, but that's not true. The postmasters, there was no mail service. The roads were a mess. The railroads were decimated. Mail service was not really operational for quite a long time. So this is a letter that was mailed on May 19th, which is after Appomattox, but it wasn't going to go anywhere. It wasn't going to get to Georgia. The mail routes were not restored. So Nashville, Tennessee, they backstamped it, Nashville, Tennessee, on June 28th, and sent it to the Washington, D.C. dead letter office. That was it. Next slide. So there's 8 of these known, this particular marking. One of them came just before Appomattox. The others were postmarked after Appomattox. I believe that based on this, that Nashville really was selected to serve as the distribution point for mail to what used to be the Confederacy at this point. And these letters just accumulated, because all of these letters were backstamped June 28th. They were all backstamped the same day. I assume that they were just collected, sat in a pile in the post office in Nashville, and at some point, the postmaster said, okay, let's get rid of them, and postmarked them all June 28th and send them all to the dead letter office in D.C., because they all got the same date. Interestingly, several of the ones were from POWs. And my thought there was that since 4 of these 8 were actually sent from POWs, that maybe the only mail coming from north to south were prisoners of war that were now free, and their letters could be sent, but the letters couldn't get through. They ended up in the dead letter office. Next slide. So cannot be forwarded was done in New Orleans. So New Orleans was occupied by the North in April 26, 1862. So now it was in federal hands. And here's an envelope. On the back, it said New Orleans, October 23, free. It was free of the South. It was now free. And they sent it to the dead letter office in D.C. So it gets backstamped New Orleans. On the front, they said cannot be forwarded, and it goes to the dead letter office in D.C., which applies the mail suspended oval marking. It's a rare cover. Next slide. And then finally, I'm sorry, there's this one. There are 11. Most of them are around Appomattox, and they all went to the dead letter office. Some of them were also marked in the dead letter office as mail suspended as well. Next slide. So Memphis, this is one of my favorites because it's the only recorded one The sender wanted to mail this letter to Holly Springs, Mississippi. And he writes on there via Memphis, Tennessee. So it did get to Memphis, but that's as far as it got. Memphis had been reoccupied by federal forces on June 6, 1862, but it couldn't go further. So Memphis sent it to the dead letter office in D.C., where it got the mail suspended marking. The story about this cover, which is really neat. So I wrote this article, it appears in the Chronicle, and I got a letter from a guy who was a direct descendant of this family that the letter was addressed to, and has collected all this correspondence around Holly Springs, Mississippi, and this letter. And he had been aware of this envelope and had it in his collection, a copy of the envelope. So he was all excited, and we spent a fair amount of time looking through his correspondence related to this. But this is the only such cover that said no mail service. Unique item. Next slide. So now if you go back to May 24th, 1861, I know we're kind of going back in time here. I had said, May 24th, everything was shut down. You couldn't go mail north to south and south to north. And then Montgomery Blair closed everything on May 31st. That was it. Well, he notified the rest of the world. He notified Great Britain. So this was sent out by Rowland Hill on June 12th of 1861, saying, okay, we received this notice from the U.S. that mail to these southern states was suspended. So that means we can't forward our mail from Great Britain to these southern states. So in the bottom of his order, Rowland Hill says, well, in the course of all letters from the United Kingdom forward to the dead letter office in Washington, return to the dead letter office in London, in which case it'll be opened and sent back to the writers in due course. And in due course meant at some point in time. And that's what happened. Next slide. So these letters that came from this Great Britain across the Atlantic to go to Richmond, Virginia, like this one, never got to the South. So this one was sent from Charing Cross in England. It got to New York after the route had been shut down, so it could not go to the South. So New York, now the stamp had fallen off in transit, that's why there's no stamp. But New York sent it back to London, to England. There it went back to the London dead letter office. The London dead letter office used this hand stamp, sent back to England without a reason for non-delivery. That was applied in the London dead letter office. And then from there, they mailed it on to the sender. This particular envelope probably got resent by blockade run mail, by a blockade runner, because later on you'll see it described at the far left, received February 19th, 1862. This letter probably was then placed on a blockade runner and sent to its destination through the lines, through the blockade. Next slide. And then this one, same thing. Another letter sent to Virginia from Scotland, could not get there. And so it gets sent back to England, to the dead letter office, and they use this other marking sent back to them without a reason for non-delivery. So these markings, which is several of each type are known. There's, I think, 6 of one, 8 of the other are known. They're very uncommon. They're all in red ink. They were applied to the London dead letter office, not in the US. Next slide. So we've gone through a lot of stuff, and I tend to talk a little fast. I hope I didn't go too fast. So look at all the things that happened between May 24th and August 26th, within a very short period of time. The U.S. suspended the Washington, D.C. Richmond route on May 24th, shut down that route. So mail could not get from north to south or south to north. Then on June 7th, the federal government decided to suspend all southbound mail to the Confederacy on June 7th. But mail could still get through to the Western Confederacy through Memphis, Tennessee, and Nashville. But the U.S. then suspended those routes on June 12th. So mail could not get across the lines except by private express companies. June 25th, the Louisville postmaster created the Southern Letter Unpaid hand stamp, which collectors love to buy. And then the private express company started carrying mail for a fee. So around June 15th to August 26th, you could get your letter to your family and cross the lines, or business across the lines, by instead of paying 3 cents, but now paying the Confederate postage, US postage, and another 25 cents on top of that. That worked for a couple of months. Then Lincoln stopped all cross the lines on August 26th. That was it. So now nothing could get through in any legal format except some routes, which I'll mention in a minute. And then as the war went on, markings were applied to show that mail could not travel to the South because mail to the South was suspended. The mail suspended markings were all applied by northern post offices or by the London dead letter office. So that's cool. I think someone is talking. Sorry. Can you mute? Okay. Anyway, so next slide. Next slide. I hear other people talking. I don't know. Okay. So anyway, the only things, please mute.
Hang on a second, Dan. I'm trying to mute.
Okay. All right, thanks. Well, we're kind of at the end. So what I tried to do with this presentation is really only talk about two pieces: the government post office mail and then the private express company mail. But if you look at the way mail went across the lines, you have to also consider prisoner of war mail that went back and forth, civilian mail that went through flag of truce back and forth. The Union tried to occupy the Mississippi River, which they succeeded in doing by mid-1862. Once they controlled the Mississippi River and had gunboats going up and down the Mississippi, the Confederacy was split in half. The Eastern Confederacy and the Western Confederacy were split in half. They could not send mail across the Mississippi in either direction. So the government and private individuals developed their own transmitting express mail services. Then you had people who carried mail illegally, covertly in their boots or in their jacket. Then you had the blockade runners. You had mail going across the Rio Grande from the Confederacy to Mexico. So at the end of the day, I only talked about the top two, but there was a vast complexity used by both the government and private individuals to get mail across the lines during the Civil War. Each of these is really a topic unto itself and is a study unto itself. And people study and exhibit, just civilian mail, just prisoner of war mail. I have an exhibit on Trans-Mississippi mail, blockade run mail, which has been studied extensively by Steve Walsky. So lots of different ways to collect this material. Next slide. So to put in perspective, if you collect 19th century U.S. postal history, Confederate Civil War or not, this book by Stephen Truppel is really phenomenal. Steve did much of the work. Much of what I own comes from his collection as he sold and dispersed it. And the book is like $30 or $35. It's not expensive. It has great illustrations and explains all the routes of all these different aspects of across the line mail. I would definitely buy this book. Civil War Society can sell it to you for about 25 or $30 if you want it. It was published by them. Next slide. The mail suspended stuff I published in the Chronicle earlier this year, so it's a long article which goes through the mail suspended markings if you have an interest. Next slide. And lastly, I have to put in a plug for the Civil War Philatelic Society. So the Civil War Philatelic Society started as a purely Confederate related society in the 1930s. The members were all interested in Confederate postal history alone, not really interested in the North. But you can't have a war without having two sides. And most of the most interesting mail of the Civil War, from my perspective, is the stuff that went across the lines, north to south and south to north. So over time, more and more collectors collect both the North and the South, as do I. And so the name was changed to Civil War Philatelic Society. and the organization is kind of devoted to both sides. The journal publishes articles about both the North and the South. One thing I would point out that even if you have no interest in joining, we have about 500 members, but even if you have no interest in joining, the website is phenomenal. The website was crafted by Frank Crown and Michael Riley. It's an endless number of resources, large census of both Southern and Northern postal markings, all the Confederate provisional adhesives and envelopes, a lot of archives, out-of-print publications, which you can't find anywhere else, important auction catalogs, collections, exhibits. You do not have to be a member to access the website. So I would definitely look at the website if you have an interest in U.S. postal history. The Civil War Society has its own authentication service, which offers expert analysis of stamps and covers, primarily Confederate. We don't look at Union material. The Philatelic Foundation, other sources deal with that, but we focus on Confederate material. And that's kind of it. So I tried to cover just two aspects of mail suspended markings. To understand, you have to understand the series of events that was taking place. But it's a really fascinating area for study, and I've enjoyed doing it for a few years now. And that's it. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Okay, Dan, so I stopped sharing. Can I ask you a question about the expertizing? You said that they will analyze covers. Do they just authenticate them as genuine, or if you submit a cover, will they actually walk you through the story of the cover and the history of the cover? Or did I misunderstand what you
No,
said?
it's mostly authentication. So
Okay.
authentication, not the history of the cover, but it's authentication. But sometimes as part of that authentication process, there'll be some discussion of the cover.
Okay. Okay.
But they do, I'm on the authentication committee, and there's several of us involved. And when there are difficulty, I mean, John Kimbrough heads the authentication, but Trish Kaufman's very involved, and others who have a lot of expertise in the area.
All right. So do we have any questions for Dan? Obviously, we have a lot of shy people this evening, Dan.
Dan, this is
At least one challenging question I can't answer, please,
all right, Frederick has a question.
Dan.
Yes.
Dan, this is Frederick.
Yes.
You wrote a cover that you said was advertised for 2 cents.
Yes.
And the image went by rather quickly. Is there an advertised mark on the front of the cover, or is that on the back?
No, on the front, there's a marking over it, but there's a little kind of oval that says advertised 2 cents. It's on the front, but it's underneath another marking. So you may not see it at first, but it's there.
It was almost like the shape of a plowshare. It wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. That's the marking that Richmond, Virginia used for advertising, the 2 cents.
This is Kent from Dallas, Georgia. I'm a member of the Civil War Society
Good.
for about a year and a half.
Okay.
And I love the articles in the Civil War Philatelist volumes that come out. But I often find myself wondering, where did they research to find all the detail they have?
That depends on the author.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, where can we start? For an article I've written, first of all, I search auction catalogs and databases to find examples of material. I read the descriptions. But in addition to that, one can access older articles from those journals and go through the philatelic literature. And sometimes you go outside of the philatelic literature to other sources. It's just a matter of how far you want to go and where you want
Yeah.
to look. Sometimes you end up with a blind alley. You can't really get any information. Other times you find things in strange places. You just wouldn't know otherwise. Um, and there's also newspapers. I subscribe to, what is it, genealogybank.com and
Okay.
Fold3 and a few others, where I can go back and look at newspapers. And so I can do a search of newspapers, say from the Confederacy or the Union from 1860. So say I wanted to search for a particular name. I can search newspapers for that name and see if that name pops up. Uh, there's also
Good
um,
resource.
there's also another resource, Find a Grave. Find a Grave, where you can research the Union soldier or Confederate soldier. You can find where that person was buried, where they were born, where they were raised, where they were buried, maybe family members, and trace them. So it
Yeah.
depends how much time and effort you want to put into it. If it's an article which I have a great deal of interest, I will pursue it extensively, but sometimes you draw a blank, you just can't get anywhere. But old newspapers,
Yeah.
auction websites, um, just going online, Googling the name of a general or something, you'd be surprised what you can find.
Yeah. I like to use Fold3, especially with the Civil War.
Yeah, me too.
Luckily, they tend to come up with some good information.
Yeah,
Well, I think to reiterate a point Dan just made, the Civil War Society website, Dan is so right. There's a tremendous amount of
Mhm.
information there. I mean, that's always a very good starting point. Um, Dan, there's one question which somebody just held up their hand, but there's one question which is in the chat. So I'm just going to read it to you.
okay.
Could you explain how a Southerner would send a letter to the North? Would you go to an express office or a post office? Would the express companies apply the stamps?
Yeah, so
Parts.
it could be done either way. So let's say you're in some obscure town in the South, which is small. You might take the letter that you want to send and put it in an outer envelope. You're going to address that envelope to the express office, let's say in Knoxville, Tennessee. Okay. And when they Knoxville, Tennessee gets that letter, they're going to take that the outer envelope, throw it out, and take the inner envelope and mail it. And they will put the stamps on. They will put the stamps on and send it in the mail. So there's two ways you could mail the letter, from either the north to the south or south to the north. You could easily send it from your town in an outer envelope to the express office, let's say Adams Express, or you could just carry it to that office. If you lived in Charleston, you may carry it to the Charleston office. They would put the stamps on.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Now somebody had their hand up and it kind of went across the screen, but I honestly don't remember the name attached to it. So if you want to ask your question, um, obviously they may have left because a few people have left already. Um,
The only thing I would reiterate what Colin said, the website for the society is really, you do not have to be a member to access it. The amount of information, the exhibits, the auction catalogs, the books, there's tremendous amount of information of both the North and the South. And so if you want information, it's a great place to go. It's very cheap. It's free.
yeah. Well, I think that's a good point. In the old days, you needed
I
shelf space for books and catalogs and journals. And now so much of it's online that you really don't need the books anymore.
have a lot of books, endless number of books. I don't know what to do with them.
Um, scan them for the benefit of everybody. Uh,
They're being scanned. You're right.
yeah. So do we have any other questions or comments for Dan? Marianne?
No questions, but I do want to comment. I did learn an awful lot. I found this to be a very fascinating postal history time for our country. And I thought the covers that you used to tell the story were um, very, what should I say, very pretty, but they were also very clean. I mean, they were great examples of covers. I enjoyed seeing this presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Marianne, I was gonna pull your leg for a second. I thought you were going to say you were disappointed that there was no Wisconsin cover.
I actually was thought about saying that. I did. Because I
'Cause
think be the first non-Wisconsin, uh, right?
I think it's the first presentation we've had where there hasn't been a Wisconsin item slipped in
Yes,
either surreptitiously or intentionally.
right.
So I think,
I,
but I mean, Dan,
I
let
don't,
me ask you a question. How much mail went from the Confederacy to Wisconsin and vice versa?
none that I'm aware of, but I'll look into it.
None at all. You're not
I
aware of
think
any
so.
mail.
I'll look.
That's
I'm not aware.
interesting. Interesting.
I would be surprised if there was any. I would be surprised.
When did Wisconsin become a state?
1848.
Yeah, still based on its location. I just don't know of anything. Not aware. I'll check. I'll see if I have anything.
Interesting.
If I have anything related to Wisconsin, I'll send you a scan of the cover.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
Actually, Dan, what you should do is if you find something, you should turn it into a one-page exhibit
Oh,
for the one-page exhibits on the website. Um, which again, I'll put in a plug that, we're still accepting one-page exhibits. And anybody who has a cover that they want to share and show, please do a one-page exhibit and send it through to Jim Meverden, who takes care of the website.
what is the deadline for that?
It's open-ended because we've been taking them now for quite a few months, and we'll be taking them up to the time of the show. And then we're going to print out each of the ones that we have, and they will be in a frame or framed. It'll be multiple frames at this point at the show, so people will be able to see the items as a
Okay.
scan in the frames.
Well, I'm going to be at the show. I have two exhibits at the show.
Are you going to tell us what they are?
Let me think for a minute. I believe one of them is around this talk, mail suspended. I think I have to check. And the other one is Trans-Mississippi Express Mail.
So that's one of the topics further down that list that you
Yes.
1 and 2.
Trans-Mississippi Express Mail is fascinating. It's perfect for a one framer because there's not a lot of it around, and I can show the various aspects of that. Trans-Mississippi Express Mail, I have a half dozen items that are unique. I mean, so that exhibit will have 7 or 8 unique items that tell the story. The mail
So
suspended exhibit will also have some of the items which I've shown here in this talk.
So for those of you who attend the show, you'll get a chance to see the covers Dan talked about, many of them in person. Um, so Marianne, do you want to say a few words about our next speaker on the 27th, Wayne Youngblood from Wisconsin, who's going to talk about postal history, a dealer's perspective? You've known Wayne a long time, Marianne.
Oh boy. Yes, I've known Wayne a long time. He's a wonderful speaker, has excellent knowledge on many areas of philately. And if you are not subscribing to his Substack column, I would suggest doing so. I find it very interesting reading.
I know Wayne well, and I've interacted with him frequently over the years, and his Substack is great. The articles are phenomenal. Excellent writer.
Well, Dan, I hope you will sign in on the 27th to hear Wayne speak to us.
Okay.
The login, if that's the right word, the link is the same one that you used this evening, the same one all of you used this evening. We
Okay.
use the same one for each of the talks.
And Wayne will be a dealer at the show as well.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Now, do you want to say anything about the dealers? I think we now have an almost complete complement of dealers, Marianne, and the frames are full, right? For
That
the
is
show.
that is correct.
So we're all looking forward to a very successful postal history focused show at the end of September in the Brookfield Conference Center.
And we have a first day ceremony.
Are you going to explain the topic?
It's if you collect squirrels or chipmunks, there'll be a booklet stamp, first class, uh, squirrels and chipmunks in the snow.
I think it's 4 different ones, isn't it? 4 different
Yeah,
designs. Yeah.
I think 3 of them are squirrels and only 1 chipmunk, I think. I can't remember now.
All right. And that will be on the Friday of the show, the first day. Just as a reminder, Milkopex this year is actually a 2-day show, the Friday and the Saturday. And the first day ceremony that Marianne had mentioned will be on the Friday at 11 o'clock in the morning. But we'll also have a program of speakers at the show and the exhibits, a judge's critique, and there'll be lots of things for people to do at the show over the 2 days.
Good.
So at that point, oh, hold on, let me just check and make sure there are no more questions for you in the chat, Dan. Yeah, I don't see. We had the question, thank you, direct seminar topic. What a wonderful. They're saying nice things, Dan. They're all saying nice things.
That's good.
Amazing, informative. Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. So lots of compliments, but no questions.
You don't have to tell me about the negative comments that were made. You could just leave it at the positive ones.
Actually, I'm looking at depending how you interpret, very fascinating, or great seminar.
That's fine. I've heard enough.
So there are
But the thing
wonderful.
is that as collectors, we're all highly specialized. So what happens is when you give a talk that's highly specialized, you're reaching out to people some who have a knowledge of this area, some have no knowledge of this area. So it's hard to kind of reach everyone. And as a specialist, sometimes, you get too specialized. I'm sure I'm a little too specialized, but hopefully people enjoyed it.
Well, I think
I
collectors have
think you
become
did
more
a
and
great
more
job.
collectors have become
Thank
more
you.
and more focused. And now here's a possible question. I'm just looking at this. Thank you for a great seminar on this topic, mainly on the AD for the 2 or 3 cent stamps. It might be very difficult to go to the post office during the war.
That is true. Well, first of all, the private express companies did have these stamps, and so they probably had enough of them they could use on the mail. Individuals, the war broke out. There were probably people in the South who had some U.S. stamps. They just had them sitting in the desk drawer. The other thing, which I have a couple of letters, it's kind of interesting. Wasn't appropriate for this presentation. I have a letter that went by flag of truce from the South to the North. And in the letter, the person enclosed 3 Confederate stamps and said, here, if you want to here's the stamps you can use to send a letter back to me. So people actually sent stamps to their friends and relatives across the lines to use. I have one cover which enclosed 3 Confederate stamps to be used by that person to mail a letter back to the South. I have another cover where they enclosed a U.S. stamp to send, so the person in the South could mail a letter to them. So people exchange these stamps.
Interesting.
And don't forget, the prisoners of war, what would they do? They would buy a stamp from the commandant and from the soldiers who were guarding them. They probably paid a premium to get the damn stamp, but they had to if they wanted to use the stamp.
Now here's another question, which actually just came now. Did either side censor the mail coming in from the other side?
Yes, everything was censored. It was very difficult.
And markings were applied?
Yes. Now, there's a lot of the stuff across the lines in the early part of the war was not censored. But once you get to prisoner of war mail, well, that was heavily censored. The letters were looked at, examined, and markings were applied to show that the letter had been looked at, read, and allowed to go through. So censor markings, that's another big area. Once again, philatelists love to go into detail. There are catalogs which list the various censor markings and who applied them, the name of the guy who did it, et cetera, and the dates they did it. So a lot of that can be is discoverable. You can find it if you're interested.
Well, it's interesting in the context of the British area in the Anglo-Boer War. You also had censorship, and the censor markings are a very popular collecting field, and you have huge collections of all the different markings and everything, and I mean it's and even as late as World War II, the censor markings, the tapes, and where they were applied. I mean it's a very popular area of collecting.
Right.
And well, I think that is all the questions and comments, Dan. So thank you very much indeed. And
Thank you.
We will see you in September. And
You
actually,
will.
hopefully, we'll see you in 2 weeks. All being well, we'll see you in 2 weeks, but otherwise, we'll see you in September. And Marianne, did you want to say anything else before we close?
No, I don't think so, but thank everyone for attending.
Thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Didn't stay cool and have a good rest of your day.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Marianne. Thank
Bye
you
all.
all for coming. Okay.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Constance.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.